They remembered to print the slides. They remembered to bring coffee, but they never remembered her. For nearly a decade, Emma Walker kept the wheels turning at a company that never once turned to thank her. She fixed the mistakes, carried the burdens, and stayed long after everyone else had gone home. And when success came knocking, it was always someone else who opened the door. No applause, no acknowledgement, not even a name, until one morning, she printed her own name for the first time in years at the bottom of a resignation letter. She thought she was walking away quietly, but sometimes, the quietest women carry the loudest truths. Have you ever felt invisible, even while giving everything you had? Have you ever wondered what might happen if, just once, someone truly saw you? This is the story of what happens when the woman behind the curtain steps into the light and when the man in power chooses to stand beside her, not in front. If you've ever felt overlooked, this story is for you. Leave a comment if you've ever been there, and subscribe to Shining Stories for more tales that honor the quiet strength in all of us. Now, let's begin with the years no one saw. For 8 years, Emma Walker showed up early and stayed late, yet not a single person in the company ever remembered her birthday. There was a certain rhythm to Emma's mornings, the kind you don't notice until the silence sets in. The drip of the coffee pot, the soft creak of the front door as she arrived at Hale Timber & Co. before the sun had even considered rising, the hum of fluorescent lights warming to life. No one else would appear for another hour at least, but Emma was always there first and last out. At 37, Emma Walker had mastered the art of being dependable, efficient, unobtrusive. She didn't need reminders. She didn't miss deadlines. She didn't leave coffee cups in the break room sink. She was, in every way that mattered, reliable. And in every way that didn't, invisible. The reception desk had once been hers, a decade ago, when she first joined the company after her divorce. Just a part-time position to get back on her feet, she told herself. But that was before her daughter came down with strep twice in one winter, before her mother's arthritis started turning doorknobs into torment. So, she stayed, moved up, quietly, gracefully, without making waves. Now, she sat tucked in the corner office on the first floor, an odd little space between the copy room and the stairwell. It wasn't much, but she'd made it hers. A faded photo of her daughter in a Halloween bee costume rested near her monitor. A ceramic mug with a hairline crack held pens in quiet rebellion against the chaos it had once known as a coffee cup. And on the windowsill, a small succulent she named Grace, still alive against all odds. No one ever asked how she was doing. Not really. They'd smile politely in passing, drop off documents for her to proof, forward last-minute slides they forgot to finish. Emma never complained. She corrected errors in silence, adjusted formatting without credit, rewrote entire emails when the tone sounded too harsh. Lindsay Moore, her manager, often sent entire presentation drafts for just a quick polish. Emma always obliged, because if she didn't, well, who else would? The company itself was a strange mix of heritage and ambition. Hale Timber & Co. sat in a historic building in Savannah, Georgia, a 3-story structure with wraparound porches and wrought iron balconies that looked more suited for sweet tea than strategy meetings. Outside, oak trees draped with Spanish moss whispered of generations past. Inside, the halls echoed with a colder kind of silence. Hardwood floors gleamed under calculated lighting. Oil portraits of the company's founders stared down at passers-by with a kind of judgmental nostalgia. Despite the outward charm, the place could chill you to the bone, not because of the temperature, but because of the way people moved within it, heads down, lips tight, constantly performing. Promotions came quietly and rarely. Recognition was rare, especially for someone without a title that began with senior. Emma didn't mind the lack of glory. Not at first. She prided herself on being the person who held things together in the background, the one who remembered birthdays even if hers was forgotten, kept track of team lunches, filled out compliance forms before anyone else realized they were due. But lately, something had begun to shift. Not in the building, in her, a small, quiet voice that whispered at night when she was folding laundry or making dinner with the same 4 ingredients she could afford. A voice that asked, "Is this it? Is this all there is for you?" It was that voice that echoed louder than ever on the morning she walked past the executive conference room and paused at the door. Inside, she saw Lindsay Moore standing at the head of the long mahogany table, the same table where Emma had quietly placed dozens of reports over the years. Unnoticed, unacknowledged, Lindsay was presenting the quarterly performance strategy, her voice confident, gestures crisp. Emma knew every slide by heart. She had written them, not just formatted, not just edited written, the data analysis, the insight comparisons, the cost-saving strategies. She'd worked on it every evening for 2 weeks, staying long after Grace's bedtime to make sure it was thorough. And yet, her name wasn't on a single page. Through the glass, Emma watched the board nod. One member even smiled and jotted something down. Applause broke out when Lindsay wrapped up the presentation. Applause for words that had come from Emma's own hands. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp, or turn away. She simply stood there, absorbing it all with the quiet grace she had perfected over the years. Then, slowly, she turned and walked back down the hallway, heels silent against the polished floor. Her hands didn't shake, her lips didn't tremble. But inside, something shifted. It wasn't anger, not quite. It wasn't sadness either. It was something older, heavier, a kind of knowing, the kind that settles into your chest when you realize you've let too many things go for far too long. She returned to her desk and sat down. For a long time, she stared at the blinking cursor on her screen. It pulsed like a heartbeat, like a countdown. Emma stared at the hallway from where the applause echoed. She smiled, and that smile was the last straw. It took her less than 10 minutes to write it, but nearly 8 years to find the courage. Emma's fingers hovered above the keyboard, the soft clicking of keys waiting to be summoned, as if the machine itself understood the weight of what was about to be said. The words weren't difficult. They never were. When she was writing them for someone else. "Dear Mr. Hale," she began. The cursor blinked in rhythm with her heart. "Please accept this letter as formal notice of my resignation." The lines flowed smoothly, professional, poised, polite, no bitterness, no regret. She thanked the company for the opportunities, expressed her gratitude for the time she had been allowed to serve, and offered a 2-week transition period. She double-checked for typos, out of habit, and formatted it just the way she had been taught in business communications night class all those years ago. She saved the file, printed one copy on crisp, ivory bond paper, folded it with care, slipped it into a plain white envelope, no return address. It had taken less than 10 minutes. But the decision had taken nearly 8 years. She sat back in her chair and let her gaze sweep slowly across the little square of space she had occupied for nearly a decade. The morning light through the small side window caught the fine dust on the corner of her desk. The photo of her daughter taken 5 years ago at a school fall festival leaned slightly in its dollar store frame, one corner curling. Grace had been dressed as a bee that year. Her wings had glittered in the sun. Beside it sat the cracked ceramic mug Emma had kept, even after the handle broke. It had once read, "World's Best Mom." Though the letters had faded into a smudged gray blur, she had repurposed it as a pen holder. It still bore the faint scent of cinnamon from a holiday tea she hadn't had the time to drink 2 Decembers ago. And then there was the succulent Grace the Second, she called it. After the first one had withered during a 2-week stretch when Emma had covered for 2 sick colleagues and hadn't made it back to her desk before midnight. This one had survived. It had needed very little to stay alive, just a bit of light and a sip of water now and then. A bit like her, she thought. Her eyes drifted to the wall where a small calendar hung, the squares blank except for scattered sticky notes marking staff meetings, print deadlines, and school pickup reminders. Her own birthday had passed quietly again that year. No card, no cupcake, no, "Hey, let's grab lunch." Not that she expected it. Not anymore. It was strange how grief didn't always come from a sudden loss. Sometimes it was slow and quiet, like rain soaking into wood, warping it from the inside out. A memory surfaced 3 winters ago, when she'd stayed late rewriting a report that had been submitted full of errors. The manager who had botched it never thanked her. In fact, he had laughed about it at the next team meeting, calling it a good save, thanks to a ghostwriter in the back corner. Everyone had chuckled. Emma had smiled. That was the moment she realized silence could be louder than cruelty. And yet, she had stayed, because the mortgage had to be paid, because her mother's prescriptions weren't cheap, because her daughter needed stability more than her mother needed pride. So Emma had tucked away the sting of each passing slight, had filed them deep into a place no one could see. Until today. Today. She would no longer be the reliable ghost. Today, she would choose herself. She looked down at the envelope again. There was nothing special about it, no label, no stamp of finality. But in her hands, it trembled ever so slightly like a secret about to be spoken after years of being buried alive. She lifted the flap, checked the letter one last time, and pressed it closed. And then just as she reached for her bag, a tear fell. It landed silently on the corner of the envelope, followed by another. Emma wiped her cheek quickly, then paused. It surprised her. The tears weren't born of fear, or sorrow, or even anger. They were lighter than that, quieter. They tasted like release. For the first time in years, she wasn't swallowing her feelings. She was letting them go, and in their place, something like peace. She took a breath, long, steady, slipped the envelope into her canvas bag alongside her planner and keys. She looked one last time at her small corner desk, the chipped mug, the framed photo, the tiny green survivor on the sill, a place that had known her best and seen her least. Then she stood. It was time to hand it to the man who never really saw her. She had only been to the top floor twice. Both times, she brought coffee, not complaints. The elevator let out a soft chime as it opened onto the 4th floor. Emma stepped out into the quiet, thick-carpeted hallway, her shoes sinking slightly with each step, so different from the firm, echoing floors of the lower levels. Everything here was quieter, heavier. Even the air seemed to carry more importance. She had only been up here twice in 8 years. Once, delivering coffee to the quarterly board meeting. The second time, to drop off a forgotten document for someone too important to retrieve it themselves. She remembered how fast she'd been ushered back to the elevator, thanked with a smile that barely reached the eyes. Now, she was here by her own will, not to serve, but to speak. Her hand hovered in front of the dark wood door marked Jonathan Hale, Chief Executive Officer. The brass nameplate gleamed under the warm hallway light, polished to perfection like everything else on this floor. She took a breath, quiet, controlled, then knocked. From the other side, a voice called out, low, even, and unmistakably his, "Come in." Emma pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was more than just a workspace. It felt personal. The walls were lined with built-in bookshelves, filled not with business manuals or trophies, but with hard-bound classics, some worn at the edges, as if actually read. Framed sketches of trees hung alongside architectural drawings of timber mills' early designs, judging by the faded ink and uneven lines. A pair of tall windows let in a filtered golden light that spilled across a Persian rug, catching dust motes in midair. The desk, solid oak, large enough to dwarf the chair behind it, stood at the center like a captain's wheel, commanding presence without flash. And behind it sat Jonathan Hale. He was exactly as Emma remembered him, tall, composed, with sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms and a loosened tie that somehow looked intentional. His salt and pepper hair gave him a quiet authority, and his gray eyes, though unreadable at first glance, were the kind that made you feel like nothing slipped past them. But something did, because as soon as he looked up and saw her, his brow lifted, just slightly. "Miss Walker," he said, standing. "This is unexpected." She nodded, stepping closer, the envelope already in hand. "I wanted to deliver this personally," she said. Her voice was steady, though her fingers trembled slightly around the edges of the paper. "My resignation." Jonathan looked at the envelope but didn't reach for it. Instead, he studied her face, as though trying to place her not just as an employee, but as a presence in his company. "You're resigning," he repeated, not unkindly. Why Emma hesitated for a moment, then offered the simplest truth she could. "I'm tired of being uncredited for work I've done." There it was, not angry, not dramatic, just honest. The air between them stilled. The usual hum of the building, the ticking of the wall clock, everything seemed to fade. For a long moment, Jonathan said nothing. His gaze dropped briefly to the envelope, then returned to her. "I didn't realize," he began, but the words trailed off, unfinished. Emma gave a polite, almost tired smile. Most people don't. She'd been spoken over, edited out, and left off final drafts more times than she could count. But this wasn't about keeping score anymore. It was about finally drawing a line where the chalk had been erased too many times. He nodded slowly, as if absorbing something he didn't yet fully understand. Then, unexpectedly, he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down for a moment. Would you—" Emma blinked. "I didn't mean to take your time." He shook his head. "Please, just a few minutes." Reluctantly, she sat still holding her bag, as if she might need to stand up and leave at any second. Her spine straightened automatically, posture precise, the way she had trained herself to sit in rooms where she didn't belong. Jonathan turned toward a thick stack of papers on his desk printouts, annotated spreadsheets, quarterly reports, the Q3 efficiency metrics, he said, lifting a report. "Were these yours?" Emma glanced at the title page. The framework was, "I passed it up to Lindsay's office 3 weeks ago," and the vendor audit from August, yes. "I built the initial structure and flagged the contract overlaps." He looked back down at the pages, thumbing through them with more care now. The margins were filled with notes, not his. She realized, but hers. The handwriting had been preserved. Maybe Lindsay hadn't had time to erase it all. Jonathan exhaled through his nose, setting the report down. When he looked up again, something in his expression had shifted. It wasn't sympathy. Emma wouldn't have wanted that, but something quieter. He looked like a man beginning to reread a story he thought he knew. "I think," he said slowly, "that I've missed more than a few things." Emma didn't respond. She wasn't ready to let that statement mean more than it did. Not yet. He picked up another report. "Would you be willing to walk me through this one?" It caught her off guard. "Now?" "Yes," he said simply. "If you're willing. I want to understand what I've been overlooking." Emma paused, her eyes flickering briefly to the envelope still sitting between them. It was still sealed, still untouched. She thought about all the years she had worked behind closed doors, beneath someone else's name, while the real decisions were made on this floor. Now, for the first time, someone was inviting her to speak. She set her bag down beside her, folded her hands, and nodded. What he thought were footnotes were the reasons the company survived a rough quarter. Emma leaned slightly forward, adjusting her glasses as Jonathan turned the report around to face her. It was the September vendor optimization summary, 16 pages thick, bound with a black clip, its cover stamped with the department's name and the initials of Lindsay Moore. She didn't say anything, not yet. She had grown used to waiting. Jonathan tapped the second page. "Start here," he said. His tone wasn't commanding, but it carried weight, a kind of concentrated attention she hadn't been on the receiving end of in years. Emma nodded. She traced a line with her finger just above a line graph showing quarterly spending. "This spike here," she said, "was caused by overlapping contracts with 2 regional suppliers. They both invoiced for the same material batch." He looked at her, brows narrowing. "I thought we caught that after the payment went through." "No," she replied quietly. "I caught it the week before, flagged it for accounts payable. We negotiated one of them down by 40%. There was a pause. Jonathan didn't speak, just turned to the next page, where handwritten notes ran along the margins tight. Neat handwriting, easily overlooked unless you were searching for it. "I always write in pencil," Emma offered, almost as an afterthought. "In case someone wants to erase it." He looked up at her, startled, but she had already turned her gaze back to the paper. For the next 40 minutes, she walked him through report after report, cost-cutting initiatives quietly suggested in margin notes, staff schedule rotations that had reduced overtime by 18%, policy tweaks that had improved retention in the logistics team, something no one in the executive suite even knew had been a problem. One by one, the pieces came together. Emma had been doing far more than formatting spreadsheets and proofreading emails. She had been quietly steering key operations of the company, one small, smart, unsung correction at a time. And each of those corrections, though seemingly minor, had added up to real savings, real impact. She never claimed credit. Each idea, each fix, each projection had been filtered upward through layers of management who were more than happy to present them as their own. Emma didn't defend herself. She didn't exaggerate or try to impress. She just answered questions calm, clear, focused. But inside, a different Emma stirred. The one who had typed late into the night while her daughter slept in the next room. The one who had sat through meetings silently, watching her own words being repeated back to her by people who never asked how she thought of them. The one who had taught herself Excel formulas by watching YouTube videos at midnight because no one ever offered to train her. She had grown used to watching others take the bow. She had clapped with them because, at the time, it felt safer than asking to stand beside them. Jonathan slowly closed the last report. The sound of the clip snapping shut was loud in the quiet room. He sat back, steepling his fingers in front of his lips, his expression unreadable. Emma didn't expect thanks or apologies. She had not come seeking either. But then, he asked, "Why didn't you say anything?" His voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't even surprised. It was regretful. Emma's gaze dropped for a moment to her lap. Then she met his eyes. "I stopped expecting to be heard," she said. 14 syllables. 8 years worth of silence. Jonathan leaned forward slightly. His elbows rested on the desk, but his posture had changed. He was no longer the executive addressing an employee. He was a man looking at something he had overlooked for far too long. "I'm listening now," he said. She believed him. Maybe for the first time, someone meant it. Emma folded her hands, unsure what to do with the quiet that followed. She had grown so used to being invisible that presence now felt strange, like sunlight after a long gray winter. "I didn't mean for this to be personal," she said softly. I wanted to leave with dignity." He nodded, then reached toward the envelope she had handed him earlier. But instead of opening it, he turned it slowly in his hands, like something delicate. "I want to ask you something else," he said, "but not as a CEO." Emma looked up, then as what he's paused, thoughtfully, as someone who realizes he's been blind. A silence settled between them, again this one softer. It didn't matter what he said next. What mattered was this. For the first time in years, someone actually listened. By Monday morning, the hallways were humming, not with work, but with whispers. Emma knew something had shifted the moment she stepped out of the elevator. It wasn't the silence that was familiar, but rather the kind of quiet that falls over a room right after a name has been spoken, and just before it's spoken again in a lower voice. Her heels clicked gently against the floor, but every sound felt louder than it should have. Too many eyes glanced up, only to quickly look away. Conversations that had been flowing moments ago thinned to a murmur. The smiles she received were polite, but tight at the corners. She had lived a long time in the shadows. She knew what it felt like to be unseen. This wasn't that. This was something colder. Being watched. By mid-morning, the change became more obvious. At the coffee station, 2 junior associates who'd once shared memes with her now busied themselves with sugar packets when she arrived. In the copy room, someone quickly closed a Slack window on their screen. the chat bubble disappearing before she could read the words. Emma didn't ask questions. She just kept moving, holding her planner to her chest like a small shield. It was in the break room, just after lunch, when the whispers found their way to her ears, no longer disguised, no longer subtle. You don't just resign and then waltz back into private meetings with the CEO. Someone said. The voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. Purposefully, just loud enough. Emma froze for a moment behind the door, hidden from view. Another voice joined in, low and syrupy, like someone pouring honey over a blade. She's clever, I'll give her that. Timing it just right, just when Jonathan's getting more flexible. A pause, a soft chuckle. She's always been quiet. No one saw her coming. Emma turned and walked away. She didn't need to hear more. Her office, still on the first floor, suddenly felt less like a space of retreat and more like a fishbowl. Everything felt fragile, exposed. The window beside her desk, that had once given her slivers of morning light, now felt like an opening for someone to peer inside. She sat down slowly, her hands resting on her lap, cold despite the warmth of the room. She had only spoken the truth. She had only told a man what he had failed to see. And yet, somehow, she had become the story. The next day, Lindsay Moore passed her in the hallway. She stopped. All tailored blazer and lacquered confidence. Eyes narrowed in a smile that didn't reach her cheeks. "Emma," she said smoothly, "I hear you had quite the conversation upstairs." Emma nodded once, expression neutral. "I did." Lindsay tilted her head. "You know how these things look. One day you're handing in your resignation. The next, you're sitting across from Jonathan Hale reviewing reports like an executive." Emma's chest tightened, but her voice remained steady. "He asked me to stay. I didn't request anything." Lindsay's smile widened just a fraction. "Of course. It's just things move fast around here. People notice." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Perception is everything. Emma. And perception right now isn't exactly in your favor." Then she walked away, her heels tapping like punctuation marks. Emma stood still in the hallway long after she left. She'd dreamed for years quietly, in the privacy of her own exhaustion, of what it might feel like to be acknowledged, to be valued, to be invited to speak instead of always taking notes. But she had never imagined that recognition would come hand in hand with suspicion. There was no promotion. Not yet. No announcement, no memo, and still, people had made up their minds. She walked back to her desk, passing two colleagues whispering near the window. One of them stopped mid-sentence when they saw her. The other offered a faint nod, then looked quickly away. Emma sat down and opened her laptop. Her inbox had 3 new messages, 2 marked urgent. The same tasks as always, deadlines, spreadsheets, updates. But everything felt different, because it was different. For 8 years, no one had spoken her name in hallways. Now, they whispered it like a scandal. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her shoulders rise and fall with a quiet breath. This was the other side of visibility. No one had told her that being seen could come with such a cost. Recognition wasn't just about applause. Sometimes, it came with eyes that stared too long. Words spoken behind closed doors. Stories shaped by people who had never cared to know her until now. And suddenly, Emma understood something she hadn't before. Being overlooked was painful, but being noticed was dangerous. The promotion wasn't official yet, but the backlash had already begun. A calendar invite, no subject line, no warning, just executive conference room. 11 a.m. It came in at 9:12 a.m. Emma was sipping her coffee lukewarm by then, while organizing invoices that had somehow found their way to her desk, even though they didn't belong there. It had been that way for years, stray tasks, quiet assumptions, silent expectations. She didn't question it anymore. But this email, this was different, just a single line on her calendar, executive conference room. 11 a.m., no subject, no context, no list of attendees, just her name and the room. She stared at the screen, a knot tightening in her stomach. The last time she'd been on the top floor, she was still wearing a name badge that read, Visitor. She read the invite again. And then, once more, her fingers hovered above the keyboard for a long time. But there was no one to write to. No one she could ask without stirring more whispers. So, she did what she'd done for 8 long years. She kept moving. At 10:40, she touched up her hair in the bathroom mirror. Nothing dramatic, just a bit of powder under her eyes and lip balm. The kind of subtle care that told the world, I'm not here to impress you, but I am not small. By 10:56, she stood outside the executive conference room, heart pacing faster than her heels had on the marble floor. The door was closed. She could hear muffled voices inside. Something in the tone told her this was no regular meeting. At 10:59, the door opened. It was Jonathan's assistant, Young, bright-eyed, usually friendly. Today, her smile was stiff. They're ready for you. Emma stepped inside. 12 seats around a long mahogany table. The room smelled faintly of citrus wood polish and tension, blinds half closed, sunlight casting thin, unforgiving stripes across the floor. A carafe of untouched coffee sat in the corner, steam long gone. Jonathan sat at the head of the table, calm, composed, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled just slightly at the cuff. But his eyes held a storm. The rest of the board, VPs, directors, and regional managers lined the table in varying degrees of indifference, curiosity, and calculation. And then there was Lindsay Moore, sitting 3 seats to Jonathan's left, arms crossed, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of her painted lips. Emma sat slowly at the lone empty chair directly opposite Jonathan. Thank you for joining us. Emma, he said, his voice even. She gave a polite nod. Of course. The silence after was too long to be comfortable. Finally, Jonathan spoke. This meeting is off the record, informal, for now. But it concerns a matter that's been growing louder within these walls. Emma didn't speak. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what louder meant. Lindsay leaned forward. It's not about the numbers, she began, voice like velvet pulled tight over steel. It's about perception, about ethics, about transparency. Emma didn't flinch. We've seen an unusual pattern, Lindsay continued, one that begins with an unannounced resignation. Her gaze flicked to Jonathan, followed by private meetings, selective visibility, and certain files being handled outside standard managerial channels. Another board member, gray-haired, expression unreadable, spoke next. We're not accusing you of anything, Miss Walker, but we need clarity before the rumor mill becomes a PR nightmare. Emma said nothing, because what could she say? That after 8 years of silence, her voice was finally being heard, but now the echoes sounded like scandal, that her worth was finally noticed, but only in the context of suspicion. Lindsay folded her hands on the table. Some of us are wondering what qualifies you to be in this room. There it was. Not a whisper, a direct blow. Still. Emma didn't answer. Her hands remained folded in her lap. Calm. Still. Waiting. Because she realized something in that moment. They weren't interested in her qualifications. They were looking for a reason to believe a lie that made them more comfortable. The truth that she had worked harder than any of them could imagine was inconvenient. So, she stayed silent. And it was Jonathan who finally stood. The room shifted, not physically, not audibly, but the energy turned. He didn't raise his voice, didn't pace or gesture, but he didn't need to. When Jonathan Hale stood, rooms listened. He looked around the table slowly, gaze settling on each face before returning to Emma. I've heard the whispers, he began. I've read the messages, seen the glances, and I think it's time we all took a breath. He stepped away from his chair, placing his palms on the table, leaning in. Miss Walker has not been promoted. Not yet. She has not been paid more, handed a new title, or given a corner office. The only thing she's received is my attention. A pause. And that, apparently, is enough to make her a threat. Murmurs. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Lindsay's jaw tightened. Jonathan didn't stop. Do you want to know why she's here? No one answered. She's here because the reports you've praised, she wrote them. The numbers that kept us afloat last quarter, she caught them. The operational savings in last month's budget. Her idea? He turned, meeting Emma's eyes. She didn't ask for recognition. She didn't demand a raise or a spotlight. She asked for a conversation. One I should have had with her years ago. Emma blinked once, but said nothing. Her chest felt tight, but lighter than it had all morning. Jonathan straightened. And if any of you still have concerns about her qualifications, then perhaps the problem isn't her place at this table, but the way we've chosen who sits here. Silence. The kind that fills the room when something real has been said. Emma didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just breathed. And for the first time in a long, long time, she wasn't the one being asked to explain herself. If there's any mistake here, he said slowly, it's mine for not noticing her sooner. The words seemed to echo long after Jonathan spoke them, not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't. His tone was quiet, firm, the kind of voice that couldn't be argued with, only heard. Emma sat still in her chair, every muscle taut like a string drawn tight. Around her, no one spoke. Even Lindsay's usual smirk had slipped slightly, replaced by something far more unsettled. Jonathan reached into the leather folio beside his chair and pulled out a small stack of documents. He laid them one by one across the table, like cards in a game no one else had been invited to play. This, he said, pointing to a 5-page proposal stamped confidential, was presented by Lindsay's department 3 months ago? It was praised for its insight into operational streamlining. He turned to Emma, but spoke to the room. Except this version. He held up a second copy. The original version, with track changes, was written by Emma Walker. A soft gasp escaped from someone on the far side of the table. Jonathan didn't pause. This breakdown on vendor renegotiations. Emma flagged it first. He slid the next sheet forward. The analysis on employee retention strategies. Emma wrote every word. Another paper. She didn't present them, didn't sign them. They were funneled through other departments, with no attribution. He stepped back from the table, allowing the documents to speak in silence. I went through everything over the weekend. Emails, edits, drafts with her initials at the bottom. She didn't just contribute, she built the structure we've been standing on this whole time. Emma looked down at her hands. Her fingers had curled into her palms without her noticing. Slowly, she released them. I had no idea, said someone at the far end. She never said anything. Another murmured. Jonathan nodded. Exactly. He looked around the room, calm, steady, deliberate. That's why we're here. He returned to his seat but didn't sit. His hand rested lightly on the back of the chair. I'm not here to defend Emma's value to this company, he said. It's already been proven. What I am here to do is to correct a mistake, a pause. I'm proposing we create a new role, head of internal strategy. It's a position that's long overdue, especially in a company this size, and I want Emma to lead it. Another hush. Lindsay sat up straighter, her eyes narrowing. Jonathan continued. She'll report directly to me. She'll have full oversight of all cross-departmental initiatives, and she'll be given the resources, the platform, and the title she's more than earned. He let the words settle before he added the part that changed the tone entirely. And no, this isn't personal. His voice softened, but there was steel underneath. Emma didn't ask for this. She didn't lobby for it. She didn't drop hints or pull strings. I offered this to her because I finally saw what I should have seen years ago. Not because of any rumor, not because of pity, but because facts are facts. A few heads nodded. She's been invisible long enough, he finished. I refuse to let her brilliance remain hidden one more day. Emma felt something sharp prick at her eyes. She blinked it back. It wasn't pity. It wasn't shame. It was something harder to admit. Relief. A kind of deep, quiet relief that came not from the title but from finally being named. For so long, she had convinced herself that being unseen was just part of adulthood. That invisibility was the price of being efficient. That recognition was for louder people, bolder people, different people. But now, under the warm light of the conference room, surrounded by people who once looked through her, she was no longer just the woman behind the desk. She was no longer just Emma the secretary. She was Emma Walker, and people finally knew it. She stood slowly, not in defiance, not in anger, but in ownership. Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. "Before I say anything," she began, "I want to make one thing clear." Every eye turned to her. She took a breath. "I didn't come here today expecting this. I didn't know there would be a proposal, or documents, or any of this." She gestured gently toward the table. "What I did know was that I couldn't keep being invisible. Not to you, not to myself." There was no tremble in her tone now. She looked at Jonathan. Their eyes met not with tension, but with something else. Mutual clarity. "I've spent 8 years doing the work that needed doing. Not for glory, not for applause, but because I believed in the work itself." She turned to the rest of the room. "And maybe that wasn't enough. Maybe I should have spoken up sooner, but I didn't. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped expecting to be heard." A long pause. "And now, you're hearing me." She smiled, softly. Not triumphant, not smug, just real. And for the first time in a very long time, the smile wasn't hiding anything. It was revealing everything. "I don't need pity. I don't need saving. I just want to be valued for what I've already given." The silence in the room was the kind that followed a storm, heavy, still, waiting for what would come next. Emma's voice broke through it, clear, steady, not loud, but full. "I'm not here to defend my worth," she said, standing tall though her knees still trembled in their own quiet way. "And I'm not here to shame anyone. That's not who I am." She took a step forward, the echo of her low heels soft against the wooden floor. "I'm here because for 8 years I showed up, every morning, every evening, through flu seasons, budget cuts, power outages, and personal loss." She let her gaze move across the room, touching each face. "I stayed when others left. I listened when no one else did. I cleaned up errors that weren't mine, wrote reports that didn't bear my name, trained new hires who got promoted past me. And every time someone forgot who prepared the quarterly forecast, I told myself it didn't matter." She exhaled, a pause, but it did. Emma glanced at the stack of printouts Jonathan had placed on the table earlier, the ones that showed her initials, her edits, her fingerprints on work that had shaped the company. With slow precision, she picked up one document, an internal proposal from 6 months ago. "Page 3, she said, flipping it toward the room. "Projected savings of 12% by renegotiating vendor contracts. We hit 14% in Q3. She placed the paper back down. Another sheet. This suggestion cutting idle digital ad spend by shifting to seasonal rotations resulted in a 22% return on investment. No one remembered where the idea came from. I do. The room remained hushed, but something shifted, shoulders straightened, brows furrowed in thought. A few glanced toward Jonathan, but most kept their attention on Emma now. She didn't waver. My point is simple. She continued. My work stands on its own, even when no one clapped. Her voice cracked slightly on that line, not from weakness, but from weight. She let it hang, let it breathe. Then she added, I never wanted a parade. I wanted presence. I wanted to know that the time I gave meant something. She glanced toward Lindsay, who now sat perfectly still, arms folded tighter than before. I'm not angry, Emma said softly. I'm finally honest with myself, and with you. Her hands, which had once trembled, now rested calm at her sides. I'm not looking for pity. I don't need saving. I need space, to build, to lead, to offer what I've always had but was never allowed to share openly, a breath. Then, if you want someone who knows this company's bones, who understands its quiet systems, its blind spots, its forgotten corners, I'm already here. She stepped back. I've always been here. The room sat still, thoughtful, a rustle of a chair, then a nod, subtle, almost unsure from the woman seated beside Martin Lang. Another nod across the table. Even Richard, one of the oldest board members, shifted in his seat as if something had just settled differently in his chest. Emma didn't smile. Not yet. She simply returned to her seat. For the first time, not shrinking into it, but filling it. Jonathan met her gaze from across the table. There was no smugness there, only pride, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't cheer but understands. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Richard cleared his throat. "Well," he said, adjusting his glasses. That was illuminating. Lindsay didn't speak. Jonathan looked around. "I'll call for a vote at the end of the day. Everyone deserves time to consider." There were murmurs of agreement, but for Emma, the decision had already arrived. Whether the title came or not, something fundamental had changed. A door had opened not because she knocked louder this time, but because she stopped waiting for someone else to open it. She had spoken, they had heard her, and in that moment, she no longer needed permission to take up space. "I don't need pity. I don't need saving. I just want to be valued for what I've already given." No one moved. Not even a breath broke the stillness after Jonathan sat down. His final words still seemed to hang in the air, echoing not just in the room, but somewhere deeper in each person's quiet thoughts. Then Emma stood, not hurriedly, not timidly. She rose like someone who had waited long enough to be small. Her chair slid back gently, the soft scrape of wood against floor, the only sound. And then she spoke. "I've never been comfortable taking up space," she began. "Not in rooms like this." Her voice was steady, lower than usual, but not soft. "I always told myself that if I just worked harder, stayed later, kept quiet, someone would notice. Eventually." She looked around the room, not at one face in particular, but at all of them. But eventually never came. There was no bitterness in her tone, only fact, history laid bare. "I don't want a spotlight," she continued. "I've never needed applause. What I've needed is acknowledgement, not because I'm fragile, but because I'm human." She took a breath, not because she was nervous, but because the words carried weight. "I've written reports that were used in strategy meetings, fixed numbers before they became problems, proposed adjustments that saved this company real money, but those emails were always forwarded from someone else's account. My ideas were handed over without my name." She picked up a printout Jonathan had left on the table, the retention strategy, the one she wrote. "This was presented in February," she said. "It improved employee satisfaction by 18%. I remember typing it on my kitchen counter while my daughter sat beside me coloring. That detail, it wasn't accidental. It wasn't for effect. It was the truth of her life, the messy, unseen context in which all her professional contributions were made. I sent it through my manager, like I always did," she said, placing the sheet down again. "He told me it had promise. The next week, it was presented to the board. Without my name." She wasn't angry now. That had passed. This was something else, something closer to clarity. "I'm not telling you this because I want sympathy," she said, her voice firm. "I don't need pity. I don't need saving. I just want to be valued for what I've already given." She paused, letting that line sit with them. It did. "My work stands on its own," she added, even when no one clapped. She looked toward Lindsay then, not with venom, not with triumph. Just presence. Some people know how to ask for what they deserve, loudly, directly. That's not wrong, but some of us, we're quieter, not because we doubt our worth, but because we were taught not to take up too much space. She didn't blink. I believed foolishly that my work would speak for itself. She shifted her weight slightly, but didn't lower her eyes. I now know work doesn't speak. People do. Emma reached for a single folded paper from her bag, one she hadn't expected to show. It was her original resignation letter. She unfolded it carefully, smoothing out its creases. "I wrote this 2 weeks ago," she said. 10 minutes to draft, 8 years to find the courage. She held it up briefly, then set it face down. "I wasn't resigning out of defeat. I was resigning out of truth, because staying invisible became more painful than starting over. She gave a small, breathy laugh, one without humor. But then, someone listened. And when you've been silent long enough, being heard feels like wind in lungs that had forgotten how to breathe. A few heads nodded now. Jonathan hadn't moved. His eyes hadn't left her since she stood. Emma took a step closer to the center of the table. "I don't know what happens after this meeting," she said. "Whether this position becomes official or whether I go home tonight and start packing up my desk." She let that linger, but either way, I spoke, I stood up, and for me, that's already a victory. Another pause. This role, if it's offered to me, it isn't a favor. It's not a token. It's a recognition of something I've already been doing, in silence, in shadow, without complaint. She looked once more around the room. "I'm not asking you to give me a chance. I'm asking you to finally see that I've earned it." And with that, she returned to her seat. Her steps were slower this time, not because of hesitation, but because she had taken her time back. Her chair didn't squeak. It welcomed her. Silence held for one long breath, then another. And in that silence, Emma didn't shrink. She didn't fidget. She sat with the calm of someone who had stopped asking for permission to belong. A subtle shift passed through the room. Martin Lang adjusted his tie and gave the faintest nod. Patricia Ray, the sharp-eyed operations head, tapped her pen twice against the table, something she only did when considering something seriously. Even Richard Hartwell, who had once said he didn't believe in soft voices at leadership level, leaned back and folded his arms not in dismissal, but in thought. No vote had been cast, no titles awarded, but something had changed. The woman once invisible was now unforgettable. And as the meeting prepared to move forward, Emma knew, even if the outcome remained uncertain, her voice was no longer missing. Not all victories are loud. Some come in the form of a new key card and a nameplate on the door. The new key card arrived in a plain envelope. There was no ceremony, no formal announcement, just a quiet delivery placed gently on her desk one Tuesday morning. But when Emma picked it up, her fingers lingered on the weight of it longer than she meant to. It wasn't plastic or access she was holding. It was proof that she had been seen. The elevator ride to the second floor felt shorter than usual, or maybe her steps were lighter. The second floor had always been where middle management worked: directors, planners, the ones who got their own offices and windows that opened just a little if you pressed the lock just right. Her old desk downstairs had already been cleared. A box sat in the corner of her new space, filled with her things: the cracked ceramic mug her daughter painted in third grade, the tiny cactus that somehow never died, and a framed photo of her mother holding Ava on a summer afternoon. Her nameplate had been slid into place on the door: Emma Walker, head of internal strategy. She stared at it for a long moment. The font was clean, the metal brushed, not shiny. It didn't scream. It whispered, "You belong." The office itself wasn't large, but it was bright. A window overlooked the courtyard below, where 2 sugar maples had already begun their early march into autumn. The walls were painted a soft gray, the shelves empty. A small notepad lay on the desk, clean and white and waiting. It was hers. For a moment, she didn't move, just stood there, letting the quiet wrap around her like a soft coat. No ringing phones, no clatter of printers or clicking heels rushing past her desk. Just stillness. She sat down slowly and placed her palms flat against the desk's surface. Cool, smooth, real. By noon, the emails started trickling in. Notes from colleagues she had known for years, some of whom had never spoken more than 3 words to her at the copier. Congratulations. Well deserved. About time. Emma read each one twice, then a third time, just to be sure they were real. She responded to all of them with grace, but her heart was still catching up. Because being really seen wasn't just about acknowledgement, it was about adjustment, letting the armor you've worn for years fall away, piece by piece, until you're not just visible, but vulnerable too. Her new role came with more than an office. It came with meetings, strategy briefings, a voice at tables where she'd once only brought coffee, and it came with responsibility. People looked to her now, waited for her opinion before moving forward. Her calendar filled faster than she expected, her inbox multiplied by the hour. But none of it overwhelmed her, because it wasn't noise anymore. It was purpose. Later that week, she walked into the break room for a cup of tea. A junior analyst, Mark Mike, looked up and said, "Hey, Emma, big congrats." He smiled genuinely, and she returned the gesture. Another colleague held the elevator for her. Someone else complimented her shoes. Small things, ordinary. But for someone who had once felt like furniture in the background, they were extraordinary. On Thursday afternoon, after a full day of meetings and review sessions, she returned to her office to find a cup of chamomile tea waiting on her desk. No note, just the cup, still warm, and a quiet knowing. A few minutes later, Jonathan passed by her open door. He paused, met her eyes, and gave a small nod. Then he walked on. No words, none were needed. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't meant to be. It was something better. Respect, spoken in silence. Emma picked up the cup, let the warmth settle into her palms. She took a sip and let herself breathe in the soft floral notes. Her thoughts drifted, as they often did, to Ava, her daughter, now 12, whose drawing still sat tucked behind the photo on her desk. A little girl who once said, "Mom, you're like a superhero. Nobody sees." Maybe now, she was still a superhero, but one with a door plate and a team of her own. That night, as she packed her bag, she looked around her new office once more. She saw her reflection faintly in the window glass. Not the tired eyes of last year, nor the unsure shoulders of last month. This was a woman who stayed, who didn't storm out in anger, who didn't beg for recognition, who made a quiet decision, stood by it, and earned her place not with noise, but with truth. And now, she no longer worked for Jonathan Hale. She worked with him. Years from now, they'd still talk about the woman who went from invisible to indispensable. The late afternoon sun spilled through the trees, casting golden light across the garden behind Hale Timber & Co. It was a quiet space tucked behind the building, framed by iron benches and flower beds that changed with the seasons. Years ago, Emma had passed by it countless times, always on her way to something or someone, never stopping, never sitting, but now she did. She chose to. Emma sat beneath the sycamore, a binder resting on her lap. It was thick with drafts and notes her upcoming strategy plan for the next fiscal year. Her initials were printed on the corner of the cover, just below the Hale Timber logo. She ran her hand lightly over the top of the page. It still felt strange sometimes, to be leading something, to have others waiting for her direction, her clarity, to not be just a voice behind a desk, but the mind at the front of the room. And yet, it felt right. Leaves rustled above her. A soft breeze drifted through the garden, scented faintly with rosemary and late-blooming hydrangeas. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet steady her. These moments, the ones between the motion, were where she felt her own strength the most. She had not arrived at this place with thunder or force. She had arrived with patience, persistence, truth. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of laughter, familiar, high-pitched, full of life. Ava. Emma looked up and saw her daughter skipping across the courtyard, her backpack bouncing with each step. Just behind her, Emma's mother walked more slowly, smiling, a thermos in one hand, car keys in the other. Emma stood, brushing off her skirt, and waved. Ava reached her first, flinging her arms around her mother's waist. "I got an A on my history quiz." "You did?" Emma beamed, pulling her close. "I'm so proud of you." Her mother stepped up with a knowing look, just like her mother. Quiet but sharp. Emma laughed. Maybe sharper. They sat together for a few minutes on the bench, Ava chattering about her day, her mother occasionally adding small comments about the bakery or the traffic, the kind of everyday talk that once felt like background noise. now felt sacred. Emma caught herself smiling, not just with her lips but deep in her chest. This was her life, not perfect, not simple, but hers. She glanced at her watch. It was nearly 5, and then she heard his steps. Not loud, just steady. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Jonathan Hale had a particular way of walking purposeful, but never rushed. She often noticed how he seemed to bring stillness with him, even when he entered a room full of noise. "Emma," he greeted, his voice soft. She stood as he approached. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't need to. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not longing, not uncertainty, but certainty. A calm that only came when both people had nothing left to prove, only something to share. "Your team sent me a preview," he said, nodding toward the binder on her bench. "It's good, more than good. Still needs polishing," she replied. He smiled. "You've always known how to polish stone into something bright." Her mother rose then, giving them both a knowing look. "We'll wait in the car," she said gently, ushering Ava with her. Emma didn't protest. She and Jonathan remained, standing beneath the tree, the sunlight slipping lower in the sky. For a while, they didn't speak. They didn't have to. There was no declaration, no dramatic vow, just a presence, just being seen. Emma looked down at her hands, folded together. She remembered the first time she walked into this garden, years ago, unnoticed, unseen, the kind of woman people passed by without stopping. But now, she didn't just feel visible. She felt real, solid, whole. Not because someone had finally looked at her, but because she had looked at herself and found something worth holding on to. Her voice, her power, her worth. Jonathan stepped closer then, close enough that their shoulders brushed. He looked out toward the parking lot where her mother's car waited. "You were going to walk away," he said softly. Emma turned toward him. But you didn't." "No," she murmured, "because someone finally saw me. But more than that." She paused, her voice catching in her throat. "I saw myself." And just like that, the weight she had carried for so long, the doubt, the years of invisibility, the whispered what-ifs melted into the earth beneath her feet. There was a time when she thought leaving was the bravest thing she could do, but staying had become the act of true courage. She picked up her binder, tucked it under her arm, and met his eyes one last time before turning toward the path. And in that moment, Emma Walker was not defined by her title, not by her past, not even by the man who now stood beside her. She was defined by the quiet power she carried, the one that rose, year after year, without applause. She had tried to walk away in tears, but his confession didn't just change everything, it changed her. Sometimes, the most powerful transformation begins not with a grand moment, but with a quiet decision. I deserve more than this. Emma Walker's story reminds us that being overlooked doesn't mean being unworthy. It simply means the world hasn't yet caught up to your value. For years, she gave her time, her mind, and her heart to a place that never truly saw her. And yet, she stayed kind. She stayed steady. Until one day, she chose to stop shrinking into the background. Her courage didn't come from anger, it came from finally honoring her own voice. For anyone who's ever been the quiet strength behind the scenes, this story is a soft reminder. You don't need permission to be seen, you don't need applause to matter, and you are allowed at any age to begin again. Whether you're 38 or 68, it's never too late to step into your light, not because someone else finally sees you, but because you do. Thank you for spending this time with us, and with Emma's story. If her journey touched something in your heart, we'd be so grateful if you gave this video a like, shared it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to Shining Stories for more soulful tales that inspire, comfort, and connect. Every click helps us reach others who are quietly waiting to be seen. We appreciate you, truly.